Described as a visionary thinker with rare intellect, Simon Sinek teaches leaders and organizations how to inspire people. A trained ethnographer, Sinek is fascinated by the people and organizations that make the greatest lasting impact on the world. Over the years, he's discovered some remarkable patterns about how people think, act, and communicate, and the environments in which people operate at their natural best. Most known for popularizing the concept of start with why, his talk on this topic is the third most watched talk on TED.com of all time. A New York Times best-selling author, Sinek is author of Find Your Why, Leaders Eat Last, and his latest book, The Infinite Game. Let's welcome Simon Sinek to the summit stage.
January 1968, the North Vietnamese army launches a surprise attack against American and Allied forces. They throw 85,000 troops at over 125 targets that day. The Americans were caught completely by surprise. Many of the commanding officers weren't even at their posts. They were in town celebrating the festival of Tet. This was the Tet Offensive. Tet is the Vietnamese equivalent of Christmas. And for decades, there was a tradition in Vietnam that there was never any fighting on Tet, much like the ceasefires in Christmas in World War I. But in this January 1968, on this Tet, the North Vietnamese decided to break with tradition with the hope to overwhelm the American forces. Here's the amazing thing. The Americans repelled every single attack on that day, every single one. Most of the major fighting had ceased after about a week, and after that week, the Americans had lost fewer than 1,000 troops, a few hundred troops. North Vietnam lost 35,000 out of the 85,000 troops with which they attacked. In fact, if we look at the Vietnam War as a whole, America lost 58,000 troops over the course of 10 years. North Vietnamese lost 27 million people. Sorry, 3.5 million people, the equivalent of 27 million Americans. 3.5 million people versus 58,000 over the course of those 10 years. And America actually won most of the major battles of the Vietnam War. So it raises an interesting question. If you can decimate your enemy and win most of the battles, how do you still lose the war? We don't fully understand the concept of winning and losing. That means there have to be more definitions. A theologian by the name of James Carsey in the mid-1980s wrote a little book called Finite and Infinite Games. And in that book, he defined two different kinds of games. If you have at least one competitor, you have a game. And there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective. Football. We all agree what the rules are before we start. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and whoever has more points at the end of the game is the winner. The game concludes, we all go home. When you have an infinite games are defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to keep playing the game, to keep the game in play, to perpetuate the game. When you pit a finite player versus a finite player, the system is stable. Football is stable. When you pit an infinite player versus an infinite player, the system is also stable. The Cold War was stable because we could not have a winner or a loser, and we both keep playing until one of the players runs out of the will or the resources to continue to play. And though they may drop out of the game will continue with them or without them. Again, there's no such thing as winning an infinite game. There's simply running out of the will or the resources to play. Problems arise, however, when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player, because finite players are playing to win, and infinite players are playing to keep playing, and they're going to make profoundly different strategic choices. And the finite player will always find themselves in quagmire, wasting will and resources when this situation arises. And this is what happened to America in Vietnam. The Americans were fighting to win, The North Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. And they made very different strategic choices until America ran out of the will or the resources to continue to fight. America didn't lose, they dropped out of the game, and the game continued with them or without them. So this got me thinking. We are surrounded by infinite games. They're all around us. There's no such thing as winning business. There's no such thing as winning your career. There's no such thing as winning life. Infinite games are a part of our existence. The problem is, most of us don't know how to lead in an infinite game. We only know how to lead in finite games. The way we run our organizations is to beat our competitors, to be number one, to beat everyone and to be the best. The problem is there's no such thing. I saw this happen. I had a personal experience that really captured this. I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft summit, the vast majority of the executives spent the vast majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their time talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with where they were going, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one was in quagmire, guess which one was racing through the will and the resources to continue to play. So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift, the new Zune, when it was a thing. The Zune was Microsoft's answer to the iPod. And this little piece of technology was absolutely fantastic. It worked flawlessly, it was beautifully designed, it was simple. The user interface was incredibly user-friendly. So I'm sharing a taxi with a senior Apple executive after my Apple talk, employee number 54. And I couldn't help myself, I just had to stir the pot. So I turned to him, I go, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune. It is so much better than your iPod Touch. And he looks at me and he says, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because an infinite player understands sometimes you have the better product and sometimes they have the better product. And there is no such thing as winning, there's only ahead and behind. The infinite player understands the only true competitor in an infinite game is yourself. How do we make our products better this year than they were last year? How do we make our customer service better this year than it was last year? How do we make our culture stronger this year than it was last year? The only true competitor in an infinite game is ourselves. There is no being number one, there's no being the best, and there is no winning. It does not exist because we have no agreed upon timeframes and we have no agreed upon objectives. So it raises the question, if leading an infinite game is profoundly different than leading a finite game, we use sports analogies to talk about our businesses. It's not the same. Then the question is, how do you lead an infinite game? There are 5 things that we have to do. You need all 5. If any drop off the list, you slide back into the finite game. Number 1, you have to have a just cause. Number 2, you have trusting teams. Number 3, you have to have a worthy rival. Number 4, you have to have existential flexibility. And number 5, you have to have the courage to lead. Number 1, just cause. If we listen to the visions of so many organizations, how are they written? Be the best, be number 1, offer the best products at the best possible price, offering our customers the greatest value, except we don't have agreed upon metrics and we don't have agreed upon timeframes, and there's no such thing. A true just cause is a cause so just, we would be willing to sacrifice in order to advance this just cause. That could mean saying no to a job that pays me more money because I believe in this, I feel like I belong here. It could mean working late nights. It could mean missing family dinner. It could mean taking business trips away from our families because we believe so much in this and we're willing to sacrifice something in our personal lives to advance this just cause. One of my favorite just causes is written down in the Declaration of Independence. the document that the American founding fathers wrote in order to declare why the United States needed its own nation. And in that document they set out to revolt, to have a revolution based on the simple idea that all men are created equal, endowed with these unalienable rights, amongst which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This cause inspired them and were willing to sacrifice their fortune, their lives, and their honor, as they wrote in the Declaration of Independence. And what's so important is that winning the finite games that are contained within the infinite game does not mean that the cause is over. The cause is literally infinite. We will never actually get there, but we will die trying. That is the point. And simply winning the revolution didn't mean that the cause was over. It means we still had a long way to go. We simply had removed one of the obstacles. And let's be crystal clear. When they wrote those words, they were talking about Protestant white men. And they thought, well, probably a good idea to include Catholics. So even in George Washington's time, he banned the organizing against Catholics in his armies, and he would regularly attend Catholic services in order to send a message that this was inclusive. And after the revolution was won, we continued down that path of trying to promote all men are created equal. We abolished slavery. We introduced women's suffrage. We had civil rights and gay rights and education and the ability for anybody to start a business or get health care or buy a home. However you want to define it, we're trying so hard to include people in the vision that all people are created equal and can have these unalienable rights. It is something we will never actually achieve, but we will die trying. The question is, does your organization have a vision, have a cause so just that others would be willing to sacrifice for it? I have a little test for you that you can take your vision statements and you can test it against this idea. First of all, it has to be in the affirmative. You can't stand against something, you have to stand for something. It has to be positive. And you have to achieve 3 little tests. Number 1, it has to be resilient. Is your just cause, is your vision strong enough to withstand cultural, political, and technological change? The number of vision statements that I read that are talking about the best tech or something that couldn't withstand a technological change. Do you know how many vision statements were turned upside down just because the internet was invented? It has to be resilient. Number 2, it has to be inclusive. That means it has to serve as an invitation to anyone who would like to contribute. So if you say something so idealistic and so beautiful that other people say, I would love to be a part of that, there is a place for them to play. So often, vision statements are written based on the engineering or something like that, which basically means it's fantastic if you physically are involved in the building of the product, but if you're back office or in marketing or in sales, you feel like a second-class citizen in your own organization, sometimes treated like a second-class citizen. It has to be inclusive. Anyone who believes in the vision should feel that they play a powerful role in the advancement of that just cause. And here's my favorite one. It has to be service-oriented. That means the primary benefit of anyone's contribution has to go to others than the contributor. In all kinds of relationships, there's always a contributor and a benefactor. If we go to our boss for advice and ask for career advice, then that advice should serve us, not them. The primary benefit of the contribution, of our boss's contribution, the advice, has to go to someone other than the boss, me. It has to flow downstream. This is the case for everything. The primary benefit of an investment in a company, the primary benefit of the investment in the company has to go to someone other than the contributor, the company. It's totally fine for an investor to get a return on that investment, as long as their ambition for giving the investment in the first place is secondary. The primary benefit is because they believe in your cause, they want to see the cause advanced. The primary benefit of leadership should go to someone other than the leader. In other words, your people. If leaders are making decisions to enrich themselves, then that is a failure of a just cause. And the primary benefit of a company, its products and services, must go to those other than the company, which means those who buy those products or services. A salesperson who sells you something so they can simply drive their bonus fails the service orientation test. The greatest causes are populated by people who are driven by service, and the greatest organizations have the will to serve. It's not some sort of sacrificial thing. It simply means that we believe the primary benefit of whatever we do goes to someone other than ourselves. And any benefit we derive is secondary. The money we make is the unintended byproduct of being part of something larger than ourselves. That is what a healthy, just cause looks like. Number 2, you have to have trusting teams. What does that look like? I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a beautiful hotel. And the reason it is a beautiful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can buy a fancy bed. It's because of the people who work there. That when you roam the halls of the Four Seasons and people say hello to you, you get the distinct feeling that they wanted to say hello, not that they were told to say hello. We can tell the difference. We're highly attuned social animals. We can tell the difference. It's like you can always tell when someone's commission-driven, right? Because you can feel it. Same thing. They happened to have a coffee bar in the lobby. And so one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee, and the barista that day was a kid named Noah. Noah was funny. He was engaging. I spent far too long standing there buying a cup of coffee because I was having such a nice time talking to Noah. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, "Do you like your job?" And without skipping a beat, Noah says, "I love my job." Now, in my line of work, that is very significant. There's a difference between like and love. Like is rational. I like the people, I like the challenge, I make good money, I like my job. Love is emotional. Do you love your wife? I really like her. I asked you if you love your wife. I told you I like her a lot. It's a different standard. One's emotional. Noah said, "I love my job." Very significant. So immediately I followed up. I said, "Tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would say to me you love your job." Without skipping a beat, Noah said, "Throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing. Not just my manager, any manager." And then he said, "I also work at Caesar's Palace. And there, the managers walk past us and make sure that I'm doing everything right and catch us if we're doing something wrong. He says, there I like to keep my head below the radar and just get through my day and cash my paycheck at the end of the day. Only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself." This is the exact same human being. And if I had met him at the other job, I can tell you that my customer service experience would have been profoundly different. Not because of the person, because of the leaders. Leaders are responsible for creating an environment in which people feel they can be their best selves. All the time, I can't tell you how often I get the question, "Simon, how do we get the most out of our people?" They're not a towel that we wring. It is a flawed question that even if you get the right answers, you're going to get the wrong direction. The correct question to ask is, how do I create an environment in which my people can work at their natural best? If you can do that, you will produce something called trusting teams. Trusting teams is an environment in which people feel safe enough to raise their hand and say, "I made a mistake." They can say, "I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. You promoted me into a job that I don't feel qualified. I need more training. I'm having trouble at home. It's affecting my work. I'm scared." Without any fear of humiliation or retribution, without any fear that revealing that weakness, that vulnerability, will put them on some short list for the next round of layoffs. In fact, they have every confidence that if they were to say any of those things, both their colleagues and their bosses would rush to their aid. That is what a trusting team looks like, and that is what a trusting team feels like. As somebody once said to me working in a corporation, I couldn't even think about what good leadership looked like, but I can tell you what bad leadership felt like. If you do not have trusting teams, what you do have is a group of people who show up to work every single day, lying, hiding, and faking. Any mistake that they make, they bury for fear of getting humiliated or find themselves on some short list. If they don't know what they're doing, they're certainly not going to tell you. They're going to hoard information instead of sharing it for fear that if they share what they know, it will make them vulnerable if somebody younger and cheaper comes in. They're not going to admit that they're having trouble at home that's affecting their work, and they're certainly not going to tell you they're scared or need your help. That will be your company, and that will be your culture. And over the course of time, things will break. I was flying on a business trip, and a scene played out in front of me where one of the passengers attempted to board the aircraft before their group number was called, which, as we all know, is a felony. And that is exactly how the gate agent treated him. "Step aside, sir. I haven't called your group yet. Please step aside and wait till I call your group," is exactly how she talked to a paying customer. So I spoke up. I said, "Why do you have to talk to us that way? Why can't you talk to us like we're human beings?" And she looked me in the eye and said, "Sir, if I don't follow the rules, I could get in trouble or lose my job." All she revealed to me is that she does not feel safe in her own organization, and her leaders do not trust her to do the job for which she's been trained to do. And guess who suffers? Customer and company. She's more preoccupied with protecting herself from her own company than she is helping the customer protect themselves from whatever's going on in the outside world. Her preoccupation is herself, not us, not the company. The reason we love flying Southwest Airlines, for example, is not because they have some magical formula to hire all the best people. It's because the people who work there feel safe in their own organizations and feel that their leaders trust them to do the jobs for which they've been trained to do. We do not trust people to follow rules. We trust people to know when to break them. We trust people to be aware of the infinite game, and even though they are given finite targets and finite roles to play, I know that that gate agent had to get that plane out on time. That is a finite game. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and once it's done, she'll do it again. I understand that, but it's in the context of the infinite game. That airline hopes to keep in business for as long as possible, if not forever, if possible. And if they are not aware of the infinite game, that means they will treat us poorly to get their goals achieved, as opposed to treating us well because they know that we'll recommend them and fly them again and talk about our great experiences versus our bad experiences. The infinite game is bigger than simply making the goal. It's about being able to sustain the will and resources to stay in the game for as long as possible. You have to have teams that trust each other and trust their leadership. That is the leader's responsibility. Number 3, you have to have a worthy rival. There's another guy who does what I do. He writes and speaks, and he's in my space. He's very, very good at what he does. He's very, very smart, and his work is unbelievably high quality. I hate him. There's no reason why I hate him. He's always been charming and nice to me. And his work is exceptionally good, and I agree with it all. I just hate him. And I'll go online and I will check my book rankings, and then I'll check his. I don't check anybody else's. And if he's ahead, I'm mad. And if I'm ahead, I'm smug. We spoke together at the same event, and I don't mean one after the other, I mean on the stage at the same time. And the interviewer thought it would be funny if we introduced each other. So I went first. And I turned to him and I said, "You make me very insecure." I said, "All of your strengths are all of my weaknesses. And every time you do something, you remind me that I've got a lot more to grow. I've got a lot more to do." And he turned to me and he said, "Funny, I feel the same about you." I had mistakenly viewed him as my competitor. I had mistakenly created a finite game where there was none. And what I was doing was wasting my time, wasting my will, and draining my resources in order to win a game where there's no such thing as winning. And the joke was, we shared the same cause. From that day, I viewed him not as my competitor, but as my worthy rival. Someone who exists to push me to make me better. I'm not competing against him, I'm competing with him. That's why you can absolutely have rivals inside your own organization. People you admire, people who are better than you, stronger than you in your own organization, and they should be there to push you to improve yourself. Remember, the only true competitor in an infinite game is yourself. The value of a worthy rival is that it's like a pacer in a race. We do not run our best times running around a park by ourselves. We run our best times in a race, the thrill of competition. The other runners are there to push us. If we're obsessed with winning, that means we will do anything to win, sometimes cheating, sometimes tripping our competitors. Sure, we'll win the game that year, but we're still a slow runner. It's better to lose the game, learn where we can be better, and come back again and again and again and again. It's important. We can have personal rivals, individuals who sometimes intimidate us, that we have these weird hatreds for, that if we can reconfigure that it's not a competition, it's actually a rivalry, they'll push us to be better versions of ourselves. We can also have tactical rivals, which are other companies out there that do something better than us that make us go improve our product. That's all. It happened. How many of you have been to Universal Studios and been on the Harry Potter ride? It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And even as soon as you start the line experience is amazing. Things are moving and pictures are smiling at you. You're standing in line. The ride's only like 2.5 minutes. The line is an hour and a half. But it's amazing. And Disney is looking over at this and thinking, well, that's good, because their lines are just metal barriers that you stand in for an hour and a half with screaming children in 110 degrees waiting to get on the 2.5 minute ride. And so Disney started fixing their line experience. That is a tactical improvement. Is it a huge existential rivalry? No. Somebody made their product slightly better than yours. You think to yourself, that was good. And you improve your product, and you move on. That's a tactical rivalry. And then you have the big ones. The existential rivalries. Those are the good ones. The ideological rivalries, where someone's entire worldview is completely the opposite to you, which drives you and inspires you to keep going. The Soviet Union and the West and the United States was an ideological rivalry. It keeps us on the straight and narrow. It makes sure that we're focused on our just cause when we have an ideological rival. Because when we lose our ideological rival, sometimes we become obsessed with winning the game. We become obsessed with the bottom line. We become obsessed with the shorter and shorter time frames. The ideological rivals remind us what the opposite looks like. God and Satan is an ideological rivalry. Me versus all the business philosophies of the 1980s and 90s. Shareholder supremacy, give me a break. You know what that is? That's a coach who's trying to build a great team and prioritizes the needs of the fans over the needs of the players. That's shareholder supremacy. Using mass layoffs to balance the books on an annualized basis. That only began in the early 1980s, didn't exist prior to that. I'm so grateful for the 1980s because it keeps me on the straight and narrow and reminds me of my cause and what I stand for. Having an ideological rival is great because they remind us of our just cause every single day. And we cannot beat them. However, we can outlast them. That's what an ideological rivalry is for. Next, existential flexibility. You may never have to go through this. I hope you never do. It may only ever happen once in your whole organization, probably rarely more than that. That when your entire business model is challenged, to advance your just cause, would you be willing to blow up your own business? Steve Jobs had a just cause. It was to empower individuals to stand up to Big Brother, to empower individuals to take on corporations even. And you can see why they were so moved by the personal computer. It could literally empower individuals to do the next big thing. So Apple's already come off the success of the Apple I. Apple's already come off the success of the Apple II. It's already a huge company. Steve Jobs is already a famous CEO. They go to Xerox PARC on a tour with he and some of his executives. And Xerox shows them a new technology that they've invented called the graphic user interface. And Jobs sees this and thinks it's amazing. You're saying you no longer have to learn a computer language. You can just copy and click and move things with a mouse on a screen to use a computer. That means even more people will have access to this amazing technology. That means even more people can be empowered to stand up to Big Brother. Oh my God, we're going to invest in this. And so as they were leaving Xerox PARC, he said to his executives, guys, we got to invest in this thing. We got to do this. And his executives said, Steve, we can't. We have already invested countless man hours at millions of dollars in the Apple III. We can't do this. We'll blow up our own company. To which Jobs replies, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision led to the Macintosh. His cause drove his decision, and he was willing to make an existential change to the company that had they not made that change, the industry would have blown them up. It happened to Kodak. Kodak in the 1970s invented the digital camera, suppressed the technology for fear that it would cannibalize film sales. They gave themselves 10 years. They knew that others would start to do it. And you know what they did over those course of 10 years? Nothing. In fact, they licensed out their technology to other companies, and they made tons of money on the licenses. And as soon as the licenses ended in 2012, they went bankrupt. The industry blew them up because they refused to blow themselves up. If you have a just cause, if your teams believe in the cause and trust each other and trust you, they will stand by through the short-term hell that it'll take to reorganize the company so that you survive. It is existential flexibility. And the final point is you have to have courage. It takes courage to lead. The pressures around us are overwhelming to focus on the short term. The pressures on us are overwhelming to win, to be number one, to think about ourselves before we think about others. It takes remarkable courage to say, I believe in something bigger than myself. I care about my people. I'm willing to view others to push me harder, but I compete against no one but ourselves. And I'm willing to make massive change, even if the pain is short term, in order to do the right thing for the long term. That takes massive courage. That's how you lead in the infinite game. And it raises one simple question. What does it mean to live an infinite life? Clearly, our lives are finite, but life is infinite. We come, we go, we're born, we die, and life goes on with us or without us. Which means every single one of us has a choice to live our lives by finite rules or live our lives by the infinite game. If we choose to live our lives by the finite rules, that means we are driven to be the richest, the most famous, the most powerful, to get promoted faster than all of our friends, to make more money than all of our competitors, to constantly compare ourselves with everybody else and get ahead of them. And when you die, you don't win life. You just die. Or we can choose to live our lives as if we understood the way infinite games exist. We have a cause that we believe in. We build trusting teams around us. We take care of our friends. We take care of our families. We live a service-oriented life. And when we pass, others will say, this organization is better because you worked here. People will say of us, I am who I am in part because you were in my life. We will literally live on forever because of the impact we make in the lives of the people around us. This is what it means to lead in the infinite game. Thank you very much.